This is Conflict Resolution Week 5. And today I want to talk about communication's role in conflict resolution. And communication plays a major role in resolving conflict. One of the major things we're going to tap into tonight is language psychology. And I'm going to take y'all to class a little bit tonight for the Relationship Marriage University. But we're still going to get into the scriptures. But the role of communication is very key. So let's start here. Words are very important. Words are very important. If you don't know the right words to use, your marriage is going to struggle. If you don't know how to express those words, your marriage is going to struggle. And if you don't know when and where to use certain words or phrases, your marriage is going to struggle. So imagine communication being the oxygen to your marriage. Without oxygen, your marriage is going to suffocate. And so every opportunity you have for language, words, expression, phrases that speak to the heart of the matter in your marriage, it's important that you, in a very effective way, express that. And so when it comes to communication, conflict is rarely the issue. All right. Sorry, letting some people in. When it comes to communication, now hear what I'm about to say. When it comes to communication, conflict is rarely ever the issue. When it comes to conflict, well, period. Let me just say that all over again. Communication is very critical when it comes to conflict, but conflict is rarely about the issue. That's what I'm trying to say. Conflict is rarely about the actual issue. Conflict is about how the issue is handled. And what I mean by that is, if you have a conflict, that issue in and of itself, because the conflict is a byproduct of the issue by itself isn't really the major component of it. It's how you handle the issue that really is the major component of it. There we go. Does that make sense to everybody? Just for clarity, because I know I was screwing up the language and the words just now. Is that clear to everybody? All right, we got one. All right. So when it comes to most marital conflicts, right? Marital conflict escalates or de-escalates based on communication. Whether it's communication style, whether it's the content of the communication, the tone of the communication, the timing of the communication, the conflict is going to increase or decrease based on that. So poor communication, right, plays a major role in whether or not conflict is resolved. All right. Any questions so far? So, language psychology, what is that? It's basically the study of how language can influence your thinking, your emotions, your behavior, and your overall relationship. Right? Language psychology basically explores the connection between what we say, how we say it, and how it shapes how we feel and how we respond and how we interpret, etc., etc. I'm trying to explain it in the simplest way. And so language psychology is basically the science of how your words impact someone else's mind and someone else's heart, right? because your soul is the combination of your heart and your mind. And when you're talking to somebody or communicating with somebody, you want to make sure that your words are affecting their heart and mind in a positive way, in a way that is productive. But oftentimes in marriage, especially when there's conflict within the marriage, we don't really choose the best language or the best tone or the best phrasing or the best vocabulary or the best timing. And that's where conflict escalates. So in conflict resolution, right, language psychology is meant to answer specific questions like, why does a person say you always? Or how do soft words calm a person versus harsh words egging on somebody? Or why does the same truth, when it's spoken, produce different results depending on how it's said? Or how do certain words get stored in someone's memory versus other words in relation to past, present, or future discussions or arguments, right? So that's just kind of a synopsis of kind of what we're diving into. Any questions so far? Does this make sense to everybody? Now I'm going to give us some put up some scriptures on the screen to kind of give us some understanding. Any questions so far? I want to go to Psalm 19. Let's look at Psalm 19. And we're going to look at, can everybody see my screen? All right, Psalm 19. We're going to look at verse 14. All right, now, verse 14, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable, be acceptable, be acceptable in your sight. So what is the psalmist saying? God, I want to make sure that when I am in your presence, that my words that come from my mouth and the meditation that comes from my heart is acceptable before you. Now, in marriage, we want to be able to do the same thing with our spouse. Language begins in the heart and in the mind before it is expressed in speech. So before words come out of your mouth, there's a meditation going on in your heart and in your mind. So what the verse is explaining is that the internal dialogue that drives your outer expression of your words is a foundational key into how you express and communicate. So if you're dealing with relational frustrations or relational fear or relational insecurities or marital struggles, you're going to be ruminating or meditating on those things consistently, more than likely. And so what ends up happening is the more you talk internally within yourself, the more you do that, the more you are going to be building up something within you, whether it's the truth or a lie or anger or fear or emotion or struggle or whatever it may be. So the number one priority has to be you have to begin to regulate the internal part of you when it comes to your heart and mind, because language begins in the heart and the mind before it ever becomes speech. So if you have a conflict inside of your marriage and you have to resolve that conflict and you need to be able to communicate with one another to solve or resolve the conflict, whatever you have been thinking about, believing or thinking, etc., when that is finally coming out of your mouth, how it comes out matters. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable. You have to learn to make sure acceptable words come out of your mouth in the acceptable tone to the best of your ability. Why? Because if you want to resolve conflict, your words matter. Your tone matters. You must have the emotional discipline to exercise emotional intelligence so that you can communicate. Any questions so far? Because I want to make sure questions are asked during this session because this is very, very important. All right. Let's go to another scripture. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18. Since we're here, sorry, let's go to Proverbs 18 since we're here. I guess God wanted us to go here because I swore I pressed Proverbs 12. But let's go to Proverbs 18. Let's go here. Proverbs 18, verse 21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. This is actually one of the greatest biblical understandings of language psychology. Your words literally create environmental atmospheres or emotional environments or environments, period. Your words, your phrases create emotional environments, but your words are a byproduct of the environment inside you. So if inside of you there's an environment that is ruminating inside of you, if there is an environment that is I can't think of the word right now, but if there's an environment inside of you that is lingering or expressing or building, then guess what? Guess what? What do you think is going to happen when you open your mouth? If negativity is brewing inside of you, that environment of negativity inside of you, what do you think is going to come out when it's time to talk? If happiness is brewing in you, if joy or peace or love versus negativity, hatred, resentment, death and life is in the power of the tongue, which means your words literally create emotional environments or environments where your emotions have to dwell. And if you don't have the emotional discipline to exercise emotional intelligence, then it's going to be a bad day for your marriage, because by the time when it's time for you to communicate, and when it's time for you to express, and when it's time for you to resolve conflict by way of communication, the words that come out of your mouth is going to either allow your marriage conflict to die or live. Let's go to Proverbs 12. Proverbs 12, verse 18. There is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. Now, notice how it says the tongue of the wise promotes health. Well, what does the tongue of the unwise promote? Sickness, disease. If death and life is in the power of the tongue, then that means your words can literally create an emotional environment of sickness or healing. See, you think that what's going on in your home in relation to yourself or your body is simply because it's normal. See, let's go deep a little bit. What your body experiences has everything to do with the words that are spoken in your home. When you're talking casually with your friends and family and you're not paying attention, those words are creating specific environments in your home. It's setting the tone for specific things in your home. Because when you speak certain words, it's not coincidental that things happen, even when you don't recognize it. So inside of your marriage, the question would be, if the Bible is telling me that there is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, does your words pierce like a sword? But the tongue of the wise promotes health. The question is your language a promotional flyer for health in your home when it comes to your marriage? Let's go to another scripture. Proverbs 13, verse 3. Proverbs 13, verse 3. He who guards his mouth preserves his life. So if you can preserve your life with your mouth, what can you do with your marriage? What can you do with your marriage? Now look at the second part of this verse. But he who opens wide his lips shall have destruction. Now, do you want to have destruction? Do you want to have peace? Do you want to have health? Do you want to have joy? Do you want to have chaos? Do you want to have craziness? Well, guess what? How you guard your mouth is going to determine that. Ladies and gentlemen, be careful about wanting your spouse to say something when they don't want to talk. Let me give you one more scripture. Proverbs 16, verse 24. Pleasant words are like a honeycomb, sweetness to the soul, and health to the bones. Isn't it ironic that the scriptures keep pointing you to this concept that there is something about life and healing inside of your words? All right. Now, let's dive into this. Conflict is going to happen in any relationship, whether it's major conflict or minor conflict. But the issue is never about the issue. The issue is never about the conflict. The issue is, how do you resolve it? The way you go about resolving it matters. And the first thing I want to highlight is learning how to frame your words and select your word choice when it comes to communication. Because communication, when it comes to conflict resolution, you must understand the role of communication and the importance of it. Words shape your perception, and words shape your perspective. Those are two different words. Words shape what you perceive. words create perspective. For example, you're in a disagreement or an argument or conflict, and y'all are going back and forth, and you say something like, "You abandoned me." Those words are going to shape a perspective. It's going to shape a perception. What does it sound like when somebody says, "You abandoned me"? What does that sound like, y'all?
Neglect.
Neglect. What else?
Trauma.
Yep. Resentment. Okay. You abandoned me. What does that sound like, y'all? Let me get a few more responses. We need some. I feel like I'm talking to a blank screen.
It comes across, of course, in a marriage, you don't care. You don't care about your spouse.
Yeah.
Or you're not loved, or you're not, showing that love. Because why would you in a marriage abandon your spouse?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I like that, Jamila and Osborne. Now, listen to this statement. I felt unsupported last night. You abandoned me versus I felt unsupported last night. How does the second one sound?
Kind of careless in a bit.
Careless, okay. Okay, Steven, sounds better. Okay, sounds better than you abandoned me. Sounds more calm. Yep, it's better received. Exactly, yep. Now let's use now this is the point. Let's use this framework, right? If I'm in a conversation with my spouse, or if you're in a conversation with your spouse, and something happened last night, if you came out and said, "You abandoned me. You always abandoning me," versus "I felt unsupported last night." Same tone, different wording.
Even saying that word support, it doesn't, like, your tone does change, because saying support versus abandonment, you can put more anger. It sounds weird when you yell, "You didn't support me," versus you really didn't support me. Like, it's more of a down tone when you say those words.
Yes. Now, what you're referring to is the expression of it, right? Because
Yes.
there is tone
Thank you.
in the there's tone in the. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Z. My
You're
bad. Go
right.
ahead.
Oh,
My bad, Z. I didn't mean to talk over you. Go ahead.
no, you fine. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was saying tone has two levels. There's tone when I'm saying it out loud, and then the actual words carry its own tone. Does this make sense to everybody? Do y'all understand the difference? If I say, "You abandoned me," my tone might be loud or aggressive, but the word abandon also has its own tone. Versus, "I felt unsupported last night." Well, my tone has its own tone, but the word unsupported has a tone as well. But the tone of unsupported is a lot better than the tone of abandoned, because the two words carry two different definitions. Now, let's be honest, y'all. Many of the people in our communities and in our world, they lack vocabulary. All right, Jamila, this is good. Now, when you say the feeling remains the same, talk to me about that.
Like when you say you abandoned me versus I felt unsupported, saying it better, but you still feel the same way. You may feel like you did abandon me, but you know that out of respect, you have to say that I feel unsupported, but you still feel the same way. You just have to say it in a more respectful manner so that they can receive it.
Boom. Hey, that's what I'm talking about, Jamila. That's what I'm talking about. See, I love it. Good job, Jamila. What she just expressed is the whole point, right? Combined with what my wife said. It's about understanding, let's put it together. It's about understanding that I feel the same. And the tone of the words may vary, right? But I know the person that I'm talking to is going to receive it better if I use a different vocabulary word. Now, why is this important? Because we want to make sure that when we are in a conflict and we are expressing to our significant other, our spouse, that they can receive it as best as possible, because we need them to take care of our emotional need. It really depends on the other. I'm reading what you're saying, Stephen. It really depends on the other person's. Agreed. Good point, Stephen. That's an important piece too, because we live in a climate in our culture where people make up definitions to different words. But what Stephen said was, it depends on the other person's interpretation of your words, which is very true. Because somebody can interpret abandoned and unsupported the same. Somebody really could do that. And to Jamila's point, even though we are saying a different word in an attempt for them to receive it better, the person we're married to might receive it the same. And sometimes that is the case. But do not get dismayed by that, all right? Don't be discouraged by that. This is why we got to learn to regulate our emotions and work through communication, because we all come from different backgrounds. We all speak different languages. We all have different lingo. We all, oftentimes, even though we shouldn't, just want to throw that out there, even though we shouldn't, we create definitions to words, and that's part of the problem when we communicate now, but that's a whole nother conversation, another day. But you abandoned me versus I felt unsupported. See, the first one is a blame game. The second one, it actually invites empathy. Now, I thought I was good at framing my words, but maybe now I need to learn how to frame them from, yes, exactly, Stephen, exactly. Because, Stephen, you might be excellent at framing your words, but it doesn't mean you're excellent at framing them for your wife. This is the whole point. I love the interaction. This is what I needed. Now I'm getting juiced up. So think about this. My job is to learn my spouse's language to the best of my ability. And what that means is I must know my spouse emotionally, mentally, right? Psychologically to the best of my ability, which is an ongoing process. But I'm very calculated with my words, but it's not being received well. There you go. So I feel like I'm failing at something I'm passionate about. There we go. So just for clarity, Stephen, you're saying you're passionate about communication. All right, got you. So now let's dive a little bit deeper, right? Framing our words and framing our word choice is very important, right? Because when it comes to language psychology, cognitive reactions are very important. The brain responds differently to certain words. And everybody's brain is different based on a few things. And we talked about this last week, y'all. The four major areas of conflict, right? Spiritual conflict, biological conflict, psychological conflict, and sociological conflict. Not to sound like a nerd, y'all. Bear with me. My point is how you grew up, how you experienced life, the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, the relationships you encountered, the communication experiences you encountered. All of this plays a major factor into this and how you receive communication. And when you have a conflict, guess what happens? If we don't use correct communication, it will cause the conflict to be lit on fire like gasoline. So if our words have to be framed a certain way, specifically to our significant other, that takes effort. It takes time. We cannot be lazy about it. But going back to the cognitive reactions, our brains respond to certain words and phrases differently. If we use words like you never, you always, or whatever, those words trigger people certain ways. It's sort of like a fight or flight reaction in the brain. For some of you all, how does your brain receive that? When somebody says, man, you never ... How did your brain receive that? Man, you never take out the trash. Man, you never say I love you. Man, you never there for me. You never care about my feelings. All right, this is a great example. Stephen says, I don't like never because I'm very literal. Now, this brings us to another important point of communication when it comes to resolving conflict. So we'll just, Stephen, since you responded, we'll use you as an example. If your wife says never, the question is going to be, why is she using that word? And what is her definition when she uses it? Is she literally meaning never? Is she using the cultural phrase to emphasize you don't do it enough, even though you do it? Is she using the word never as a reference to something? See, we have to learn how to. It is a lot of work, but it's necessary work, right? When we're communicating, we have to do the best we can not to be triggered by what we hear, but figure out a way to get understanding about what we're hearing. So if somebody says, you always disrespect me, you always ignore me, you always, how does that word affect y'all? When somebody uses the word always, you always loud, you always negative, you always, like, how does that affect you? Okay. Now, Jamila, why do you use those terms? There we go. This is my point. And see, Jamila, for you, your husband would have to understand that, you know what? When I use these words, I just don't have any other words that I know what to say at the moment. And so two things have to happen. If you're trying to resolve a conflict, your husband has to be mindful that, right? You have your husband has to be mindful that, okay, sometimes when she uses these words, it's for a lack of better words. So let me not get stuck on the words never and always, etc. And then for you, Jamila, what it means is you want to work on increasing your vocabulary and your phrasing so that you can communicate to the best of your ability so that he can meet your emotional needs. Because remember, 9 times out of 10 or 90% of the time to resolve a conflict, you're trying to get the other person to meet your emotional needs. That's all. I think more people are more reasonable than we give credit for. I really do. I just think that people become more unreasonable or irrational the more that it seems like their needs emotionally are not going to be met. Would y'all agree to that? Well, even if you disagree, do y'all understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah, I think, amen. I think that's a major key right there. But our brains react to words differently, right? So, for example, cognitive reactions. Let's just say you and your spouse are having a conversation, and Tiffany, you said it typically causes offense. It does. Now, Tiffany, why do you think it causes offense when people say those words?
Usually, I'll just say like in our scenario, when you use that word or use that phrase, it's over. Whatever it is that you're saying is probably over exaggerated.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it like that, but it really is, because is I can't really say that my husband is always, but I know that I use that word. I just use it again, but I use that word a lot, and he'll get offended. And if he says that I'm always doing something, I'm gonna get offended, because it's whatever it is that we're saying, we have to really get outside of ourselves. And when we take a step back and look at the situation, this really not the case. Like, my husband is not always doing like, you know what I mean? Like, he's not
Right.
always saying something, or I'm not always responding that, like you said, I'm responding and where I'm being loud. That's not
Right.
always. So, but again, when you're mad and you're upset and you're in a place of conflict, you're pulling and you're reaching for words. So when you use always, it's probably over exaggerating the situation.
Right. 1000%. That's exactly it. And both spouses have a responsibility in these moments, because if there's a conflict, it's important that we understand how to navigate that conflict by recognizing that my spouse may not have better words in the present moment. Maybe they're not looking to be an encyclopedia or a dictionary or a thesaurus, right? Maybe they're just looking to express the best way they can in the moment. So we have to do our best not to get offended at cultural language at times. But at the same time, we should put some effort into reversing the easy way out and using certain language that's problematic at times. So it's a dual responsibility, right? Let me get into this third thing, which is emotionally charged words. Now, language can be emotional. Every word, but language can also be logical. Now, typically men operate in logic. Yes, agreed, Osborne. Using the term shows a lack of empathy. It does. That's why it's important that both parties work at fixing their side of the issue. If you're the person that uses those types of words, like for example, in the counseling world, they say use I statements, like I feel or I experienced this, etc. Right? But going to number 3, emotionally charged words. Let's think about this. Language can be very emotional, but language can also be very logical. Now, generally speaking, it does not mean men are not emotional, and it doesn't mean women are not logical. What it means is typically in heightened moments of conflict, men are more logical, women are more emotional. Again, I'm not saying men don't get emotional. I'm not saying women don't get logical. I'm saying typically men function in logic, women function in emotions. Both have a place, all right? The point is we have to learn how to balance them out amongst ourselves, amongst husband and wife. But every word carries a level of weight to it in the conversation. So inside of conflict, we must be able to communicate. But as we communicate, understand that your words have weight, and death and life is in the power of the tongue. And what I say is going to bring healing or sickness, or what I say is going to bring harm or help, or what I say or how I say it is going to be like a sweet honeycomb, or it's going to be like a sword piercing, right? So, learning how to use precision when it comes to vocabulary is important to the best of our ability. Here's why. The words we use changes the impact of the message. For example, let's just say you had a long day and you come home and there are certain things you were supposed to do, but you didn't do it. And your spouse calls you lazy. How would that make you feel? You had a long day at work. You finally get home and you were supposed to do something, you didn't do it, and your spouse calls you lazy. How would that make you feel? Upset. Okay. It would be your mama. It would be triggering for sure, yes. And the reason being is this. The reason you'll be upset, the reason it'll be triggering is because it's not the right word to express the situation. So this goes back to what I'm saying about the cognitive reactions. Ms. Miller, correct. Confused, angry, unappreciated. Yes. Why? Because your brain is responding to the words a certain way. Why? Simply because of the word that's being used. And that word can charge someone emotionally. Versus your spouse saying, I understand that you're tired, but this is how I feel about it. That's that right there changes the dynamic of the conversation, because instead of calling you lazy, I'm acknowledging that you're simply tired, but I'm disappointed that you didn't get what you said you were gonna get done. So understand something, right? When we're dealing with communication, these things are very, 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 very important. Now, I want to talk about one other thing for a second. How you talk to yourself and how you talk to friends or family plays a role in how you talk to your spouse. I want to encourage everybody to practice learning how to talk to yourself in a way that you would speak to your spouse. Because how you talk to yourself is going to influence how you talk to your significant other, your spouse. Now, this may seem like minor or not important, but it really is. I promise you it is. If you are used to talking to yourself in a very negative way, or a passive aggressive way, or a nonchalant way, or in a crazy way, or in a passive aggressive way, or in a demeaning way, that language is probably going to come out when you talk to your spouse, especially in moments of conflict. Because remember, in moments of conflict, your words are going to either escalate the issue or is going to de-escalate the issue. And what we always want to do is de-escalate at all times. So when you say things like they don't care about me, right? Things like that, you're speaking negatively and you're speaking to yourself in a way of resentment. And so now when you go to talk to your spouse, and if that spouse makes you feel a certain type of way, you might express some of those same sentiments to them that you say to yourself. And it might not come across properly in relation to the situation. So words have to mean something. Words have to matter. They have to. Do I want to go into this? I'll go into it briefly. Your upbringing shaped your communication. Your trauma shapes your communication style. So you might have grown up in a certain environment where you grew up in the hood. So y'all talk a certain way. You might talk aggressive. You might talk, with slang. That's just a byproduct of where you grew up. But your trauma is a reflection of your communication style. Anybody want to comment on that part? Because depending on what you went through determines how you respond to certain things.